I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Playmaker and integrating Playmaker into Unity. Playmaker is the way that we are going to create all of our interactivity inside Unity. Playmaker is a pretty fantastic tool if you've had a chance to play around with it. I'm going to give you an overview of how to get Playmaker. I'm assuming you've already purchased it at this point. It should be available through the Unity Asset Store. Now, I want to integrate Playmaker into this project and start to utilize some of its functionality. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go to the Window pull-down menu inside Unity. I'm going to go to Asset Store. I want to make sure that I'm logged in. And once I'm logged in, I can, if I haven't already purchased Playmaker, we need to do that. And once it's purchased, and of course I can just search for Playmaker, and there it is, Playmaker. Okay, now if I go home, Playmaker usually shows up in the kind of top paid assets or most popular. I'm not seeing it here, but if we just kind of search around for it, usually it'll pop up because it's a very popular tool. Or we can just type in Playmaker in the search field and find it. Now, once you've purchased it, you should be able to go to your download bin, and inside your download bin, this is going to show you all of the content that you've purchased or downloaded from the asset store. Now, I have Playmaker as all alphabetical, and I have Playmaker listed here. Okay. Now, in order to incorporate this component into Playmaker, I'm going to download it. And once that hits 100%, I'll hit import. And once I hit import, it'll take a minute, but a window's going to pop up over here on the left side. And I'm going to let everything default, and I'm going to hit the import button. Now, it's going to take a few minutes because it's going to unpackage, and it's going to incorporate that content into this project folder. In fact, in a minute or two, you'll see under my assets folder, I'll have a Playmaker folder pop up when it's finished. That's one indicator that we have access to Playmaker. So I can see it's done. I have assets, and inside assets, I have a Playmaker folder. Now, I'm going to close my asset store, but just remember, in this folder, this is also, or the asset store, this is the place where we'll get extended terrain effects and lots of really cool stuff. And if you've downloaded something from or purchased something from Unity, again, it'll be in your download bin. So it's an easy way to go find that content. So while I'm here, I may download the terrain assets as well because I do want to use those. So I'll let that download and I'll import that later. But for now, I want to focus on Playmaker. So I'm going to close the asset store. And once we've downloaded Playmaker, you should see a couple of different things. One, you should see the Playmaker folder available in your assets folder, and also you should now have access to a Playmaker drop-down menu in the application drop-down menu. Okay, so I can click on Playmaker. Now, when we're accessing Playmaker, there's going to be two windows that we want to use over and over again. And the first one we can find if we go to Playmaker. We want to use the Playmaker editor. Now, we open the Playmaker editor, we're going to get this window that pops up. Now, if I click on my scene view or I click on the hierarchy or the inspector, you can see that I lose focus of the Playmaker window, and that is not what I want to do. So if I go to Playmaker editor and bring that back up, what I want to do is I want to modify my Unity interface to accommodate this Playmaker tab. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to roll my mouse over the Playmaker tab, and I'm going to click and drag. And as I do that, you can see that I can just kind of move this around and snap it to different locations. Okay, and where I'm going to place mine is down and to the right of my project folder. So when I get done, if I snap this off to the right side, if I did that right, I should be able to see my project folder over here on the left side, my Playmaker editor here on the right side, and that's occupying the bottom of the screen. So that's a pretty good place to place things, so I can see Playmaker and still see my assets. Okay. Now there's one other window that I'm going to want to look at regularly, and I'm going to go to Playmaker, and I'm going to look inside the editor windows menu, and inside the editor's window there's the action browser. and I'll go to the action browser. Now the action browser, I'll just make this window a little bit bigger, is a huge library of functionality inside Playmaker. And we're going to use a lot of content from the action browser, and we're going to incorporate that into our Playmaker editor. So we want this window available regularly. Now there's two places that I recommend putting it. I'm recording this on a really high-res layout, a high-res monitor, so I have a lot of screen real estate to play with. So I'm going to take my actions browser and I'm going to snap that to the right of my inspector. Okay, so I have focus on my inspector, and I also have focus on my actions. Now the actions, if you're working on a laptop or something that's lower res and you need the screen real estate, if that feels really cramped, the other layout that I'd recommend is just nesting the actions behind the inspector. Okay, so we can kind of maximize this window, and I can shift back and forth between the inspector and the actions. Now, I wouldn't recommend doing that unless you really need the screen real estate, because there's going to be times when we want to access both the inspector and the actions, and it'll just be so much more convenient if we can jump back and forth. Okay, so now there's a couple of other things that I want to discuss about window layout before we start looking at Playmaker. And that is, I've currently modified my Unity layout. Now, if I kind of destroyed my layout and I didn't get things just the way that I want them, I can always reset the layout by going to this layout drop-down menu in the top right-hand corner. And I can just go back to the default. You can see that snaps back. This is the default layout inside Unity. And I'll very quickly go back to the Playmaker editor and just grab this window and snap it where I want it. I'll go to Playmaker editor windows and grab the action browser, and I'll take that window and snap it where I want it. So if I kind of get things out of whack and I mess up my Unity interface, I can always go back and just reset it and try it again. Once you get things set the way that you want it, you can also save your Unity layout. So I'm going to hit Save Layout, and I'm going to call this not my default. I don't want to overwrite default. I'm going to call this the Playmaker layout. Okay, so if I want to, I can switch to the default layout. And then when I want to use Playmaker, I can go back to Playmaker. Okay, so that's the general setup for Playmaker. There is one other thing that I want us to be mindful of before we jump into Playmaker, and that is inside the Playmaker editor, you'll notice that there's a little bit of text that's popping up down here. It's white text, and it doesn't seem like much, but as we start adding content, these hints are going to kind of overwhelm our screen or our Playmaker editor, and it's more information than we need to pay attention to at this point. So what I'm going to suggest that you do is you go down to the bottom of your Playmaker editor, and where it says hints F1, either hit the F1 key or click on the hints button to turn off hints. Now, once we become familiar with Playmaker, I'm going to recommend that you take a look at the hints and see what kinds of things it's telling you. But for now, I'm going to suggest that you turn that off. And I'll remind you about that a little bit later as well. So take a minute, download Playmaker, set up your Unity, your viewport, your layout to accommodate the Playmaker editor window. So again, that's Playmaker editor window. And also the Actions browser, which is under Playmaker, editor window, action browser. All this other stuff will access it as needed, but for now, this is the way that we want to lay things out. So I'm going to save what I'm working on, choose File, Save. I've saved my layout. I'm pretty confident in that. And the next presentation, we'll take a look at Playmaker and start to build some basic functionality inside our island project. But we'll do that in the next presentation.